to the Power of Purpose. It's me, Anton NM, and today I'm joined by special guest. As you have heard, I have on my far end.
I'm Augustinus, well known as Mr. Mind. I am a singer and author of leadership and knowledge, a speaker somehow, and a little bit of an administrator. So I think that is enough to know for now.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Harrison Musimuko. I am a consultant. I help people with public speaking and communication, as well as presentation skills, as well as youth activism. I'm involved in various youth projects, as well as leadership development.
Great. As for me, you may know me. I'm Anton, author, speaker, and poet, and many other. Today is not the usual where we share impacting stories, but today we are diving into a different direction. As a quote from John Maxwell, he says, everything rises and falls on leadership, be it marriage, be it a country, be it a company, a church, anywhere else. The rise and fall, the greatness or the decline of anything rises and falls on leadership. And today we are about to get into another series where we'll be dealing with African leadership and related issues on youth empowerment and other programs related to that. And with that, I'll start with my first question. What is your journal on African leadership? I'll start with you, Mr. Augustine.
Right. It's interesting to look at the whole spectrum of leadership in the African context. One, we have an interesting history. This is the only continent where people were traded as slaves. And that trading has got an impact on our thinking, our view of life, and the way we lead ourselves, and the way we view the world per se. Secondly, we have gone through another yet a degrading spectrum of colonialism, which further reduced us as human beings to be objects, and we were looked at as people who are not having the brain enough to think for ourselves and do so many things for ourselves. Now, having to get organized by the generation that did whatever they did to fight the colonialism and apartheid, it can tell you that we are a bit younger to be able to pick ourselves and stand as an organized entity and compete with the world.
Yes.
So those are the things that I'm considering, but I'm seeing awakening a thing, especially for us. It did not begin now. It began with political freedom, which our forefathers have fought for, where people perished in war. And now we are supposed, this generation, to begin putting up a struggle of economy. So they had the political activism, and we are having a duty of economic activism.
Wow, that is well put. Mr. Hart, what is your perspective in addition to that?
In addition, well, first of all, I just have to say that I do totally agree, and not to reiterate what he's already said,
Yes.
but he started touching on what needs to start happening now. So, from the perspective of looking at African leadership, given our history, we also need to start looking at our future from the point of view of what type of leadership is actually needed. Because I think that is a dialogue that has not been had.
Yes.
At least in a broad sense, so that we are all cognizant, or we all have an understanding that this is the sort of leadership we should be seeking. So, and I guess that's how we'd see incidences like dictatorship start to happen. You know, initially a revolutionary leader would come in, lead a country through independence, and all is good and well. But when that particular phase is over, so there was the initial struggle, and now for the economic revolution to occur, as well as our new style of self-leadership, that switch would not be made.
Yes.
And the same, and a different leadership would be needed, but what do we usually have? We have leaders who have stayed in power. They would have not necessarily transformed in terms of what they had to offer as leaders, but they'll still hold on to that power, which I feel kind of cripples the progress that we would have to make based, and again, also us having to understand what type of leadership we need to be looking towards.
Okay. So, Mr. Augustine talks about slavery. We come into colonialism. You talk about we need a dialogue in terms of economical changes, in terms of the youth empowerment. Moving forward, after all these have happened, there is a stagnation. We hoped, as an African, I hoped and believed that every time you get independence as a country, there is a sort of power that you're given to develop yourself. But I haven't seen much as Africans. Now, I'm speaking this. We are around here on this table. We are between 40s and 30s, right? So we have about another 40 years. That is if we reach 8 years. So speaking as younger generation between the 30s and the 40s now, looking into another 40 years. So we got this independence, many African countries, which we're supposed to now develop ourselves. We have resources. But it seems it's now degrading backward. What are we missing? Sir?
I think what is missing is the missing link of the motivation that sends our older generation to take up guns. There was something that irritated them, which they didn't like. The unfortunate thing is that when we gained the political independence, that drive died somehow. Because if it was to be alive, then we could sit and see how we could best pick ourselves to be organized in a way to look into different sectors and set up ways and means. If it's about infrastructure, Chinese and other Asian countries which went through similar situation of colonialism, though the impact was not the same as Africans, did the same. We are taught by the older generation that in the 1940s, in the 60s, the Asian countries were not on par as they are today. Or what they did is, they realized when the colonizers left that they needed to organize themselves, to empower themselves, to focus on different areas where they needed to gain skills and knowledge to begin to work through their own independence. Not political independence, but the ability to produce whatever they needed to produce, the ability to offer relevant education that doesn't produce beggars of jobs, but rather the thinkers to turn around situation within the country, whether it's agriculture, whether it's manufacturing. So they had to send their children to Europe, to America, to gain these skills, to work with the Americans, to work with the Europeans, but not to work and become salary addicts, but to work and gain skills which they could be able to take back home. Now, when we gained independence, we got too excited to be in the seats, and then we forgot that we needed to learn skills which could cut the umbilical cord from the dependency to the colonizer and to be independent as states, like we declared them during independence. I think that is where the missing link have come from. But that was motivated by us having to forget the drive that sent us in the bush.
Wow, thank you very much, sir. He spoke about developing skills. You, Mr. Hari, as an inspirational speaker, trainer, and you do all this part of it, what do you think we need? First, earlier we were talking about, before we go into the government, us as individuals, us as youth, us as citizens, what are we looking at in terms of skill development, or in that area, what are we lacking?
In terms of, I mean, one of the biggest problems that we face in African countries in general, especially those that are still developing and recently independent, is this phenomenon called brain drain.
Okay.
Again, it ties right back to what Augustinus was saying. People become salary addicts.
Okay.
So at the end of the day, our brain drain is an occurrence or a result of looking for those greener pastures, as opposed to acquiring the skills, coming back and using those skills in order to develop and grow. And part of the reason for that is because we have not gotten to a social awakening of a psychological awakening, where we realize that, yes, we have this, but it's for the sake of that. I'll give an example.
Yes.
If, for example, someone runs a farm,
Yeah.
right? And in that farm, they have a place where they keep grain. Some of that grain is supposed to be used for plowing back so that they can be crops that will grow and eventually, be put back into the storeroom, and some of it is consumed. But coming from the background and history where we were, from the depravity and, being not being afforded certain, even basic rights.
Yes.
All of a sudden we are in the position where now we have this storage of grain at our disposal. And without the experience, or even let me say it this way, without the drive or motivation, we know theoretically that we should harvest, we should plant and all those things, but we think of the now. We're not thinking into the future. So when people took up guns, it was, yes, it might be at the cost of my life.
Yeah.
Yes, I might not even return from this, but my children and my children's children will grow up in a place where they will not have to pick up guns for this particular reason.
Yeah.
But now what we're doing is, because we do not have that drive, that what are we looking towards, we're still thinking very much on the here, the now.
Yeah.
And there's even a book, I'm sorry, the title is in my mind. I
Yes.
haven't read it yet, but it's a title that seems to encapsulate the general narrative of when people get into power, and it's now we eat. So that whole thing of, yes, now we have look at all these resources at our disposal, and what do? We try and find ways to get rich. Just a glorified salary chasing type of thing. Look at the scandals that have happened recently in Namibia concerning, certain industries.
Yeah.
What was that motivated by? By that greed of, yes, I'm now in a position, now instead of plowing and putting in and so that we can have a harvest to benefit more people, it's, I've got one life to live, this is at my disposal, let me take advantage of it.
So what skills do we need to develop moving forward now?
I wouldn't say it's so much skill, but more of a mentality. If we have this mentality of now we eat, regardless of what skills you have, your skills are not going to contribute towards the well-being of the nation and to Africa as a whole. Your skill is just going to go to monetizing whatever opportunities you can find and fattening your own pockets. And that is, unfortunately, predominantly the reality that we have. When we talk about, and this is why, I don't look at, how people say, no, old politicians and people who have been in power, they're just enriching themselves and whatnot, that sort of thing. But let's also look at the young people as well.
Yeah.
A lot of young people have been empowered. A lot of young people have been afforded opportunities, and I'm not saying enough has happened, but once that happens,
Yeah.
does it have, is the result of that whereby, okay, great, I have a brother right here, I have a brother there, I have a community I've left behind there, so now with all these things that I'm gathering, I'm going to plow back and see how I can bring everybody on board so that we can all, elevate from this.
Yes.
But what do we have? We'll have families that will go and visit the village in BMW SUVs, Mercedes SUVs, and that whole community is dilapidated. Will drive past rural schools that are lacking ceilings and roofs. Will drive past boarding schools, which we see in newspapers, that don't have plumbing. The children are starving because there's no food, there are no books, and all those things. And yet, those same people will turn around and find another scapegoat. Now, that's why I say what needs to change is the mentality. It has to come from, we all have to get from a place, because when an individual picked up that gun, it wasn't for the sake of, this looks like fun, this looks like it will benefit me. It was from a place of self-sacrifice, of saying, what can I do in this here present time to benefit the people that I have left behind, as well as the people who are going to come after me. And I think that is what needs to happen, because skill, intellect, we have all that. We have brilliant African people, but what we are lacking are the leaders who have that desire to take up this current struggle, to say, listen, we need to change our mindset and think about the future.
Thank you very much. Paul says, be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. If we're going to look for revolution, if we're going to look for any kind of development, I'll tell you, that is my perspective. My perspective here is, we have the Constitution, we have skills, we have all kinds of resources we have as Africa. But attached to the Constitution is something that was lacking, that can't bring the Constitution into realization, was moral values. Because as much as we need mental transformation, if I am empowered, no matter to what level, if I enter into an office, there was no ground of certain moral values, certain principles, and certain ethics, first as an individual, no matter what. And somehow, not all of it, but somehow, that's where we are as Africans. Because some of the leaders, we are even ashamed to call them leaders. It's very painful, because the word leader is an honor. The word leader is meaning you are empowering people, moving people forward. So certain things, certain people, certain honorable, they are dishonored. Now I'm just going to say that. This is African perspective. So certain things we find that we are lacking is some personal principles and moral values. Because no matter the office you put me in, you can put up the Constitution. They set up, in every country almost, there is Anti-Corruption Commission. But sometimes the Anti-Corruption Commission is corrupt. What is happening? If those who are supposed to stop the corruption are corrupt in many African countries. So it has also, we need to begin to look at, as we are developing leaders, what set of personal principles and personal values we need to put into them that they cannot break, even if I get there. Now, we were talking about skills, and you say mindset. And I'm adding to that personal moral values. Let's go a little bit deeper into a scary thing. Many people are empowered. Right now, let us not pretend, let us real. Right now, our minerals are not going to be there forever. Our oil, our gold, our diamond, whatever we have as African, is not going to be there forever. And here we have a sensitive issue. The issue of what you tried to address earlier, Mr. Harry, about myself, which is the issue of corruption, basically. So, how do we begin to move forward as individuals first, even as citizens, to tackle this issue of corruption, Mr. Augustine?
Well, before we move into tackling the corruption, I think it's always like in research, you need to do a background search in order for you to understand the issue, where it had begun as the root, and why is it that way at present. And then from there you can strategize what you can do in the future as a solution. You have touched a little bit of moral. if you read the history, it will tell you when the white people arrived in Africa, they found organized society which were morally upright. We never had prisons. We never had courts like the ones that we are having now. We did not have those professional lawyers as it looks now, but they did not find a broken society.
Yes.
They found an organized society.
Okay.
What kept it intact was moral.
Morals.
And it's a pity that they have brainwashed us to become a valueless society or a society without moral when we had a strong background. So I think the moral value is there. Maybe the transition between the traditional setup and the modern setup was not done well.
Okay.
That is my opinion,
Yeah.
or that is how I view it. And in terms of leadership, I think we had leaders before the white people arrived. And these leaders, unfortunately, they did not lead in the manner that we are leading today.
Yeah.
We had kings instead.
Okay.
Now, the unfortunate thing is that whether we have given them different names today, our mentality still look at ourselves as people who are in the positions in the same traditional way we saw ourselves. So when you give a person a title of a president, within the blood runs the DNA that informs him that when you are at that throne, you are a king. And remember, a king have a different setup as compared to the democratic elected person.
Yeah.
A king thinks that he's having absolute power, and this was bestowed on him or her by God. And now here you arrive into a society where you are informed that we elected you, you are not as powerful as us who have put you in power. And yet there's that conflicting conversation this person put up every night he goes to bed, where partly he thinks that he's having absolute power, and on the other side he need to fear the power that is given to him by the elect. So now those are the things that we need to sit and seriously discuss to have an effective transition as Africans. And once we have transitioned to understand that at the point where we are, it's no longer me being born as a king, but me being given a privilege by the society. That is the only time we begin to move into a direction to respect those who put us in power, rather than us valuing our positions more than the people who have brought us there. So as we do that, we'll understand that the institutions which we put up, they are not my institution as a person who is given the privilege, but the institutions put in place by the people to regulate the society. So when they decide and complain that things are not done right, it's rather not a leader who stands up and defend himself, but the society that need to stand up and pinpoint things that they are not happy with in order for them to sit together, not in arguments, not in war, but to sit together and reason to find a solution.
Wow, that is very powerful. Now, I'll say this. I was watching a video earlier of a Zambian general auditor was giving a speech, and he said this. If you are in the public office, you are in charge of the public funds. Public will require of you to know everything about you because you're running a public. And I love what he says. He says, you no longer have a private life. If you drive a BMW, the public want to know, how did you get it? If you have a business, because you're in the public office, you are accountable to the public. So I was watching this video area, and then I was fascinated, and that they were busy dealing with the same issue that we're dealing with, and I just wanted to call it because it's out there. It's in the news. You can Google it. I think I have the video. I can send it to you. It's circulating, and for me, it was very, very important. It's just in alluding to what you are saying, that there must be an accountability. As long as you are standing for the public, accountability, we need to know from your shoes to your hair. No, this is leadership. We talk about transparency. If we're going to move forward as Africa, we shouldn't shy away to deal with the issues of transparency, because the challenge is the brown envelope behind back doors and all that stuff. If you're into public, you are leading the masses. You need to walk in the naked truth. If I have to put it in that poetic sense, you need to walk in the naked truth. So that is the issue where we are looking at now. Now, I'll come back to you, Mr. Harry. Here am I as a young person. Very much, I have personally taken time to invest in myself, develop all sorts of skills. Now, dealing with what Mr. Augustinus was saying, the issue of course, we're dealing about the back root of corruption. We're looking at the back root of corruption. Here, as a young people, you said earlier, we have the skills, but how much is the corruption eating? Because now I don't have opportunities, because I don't know somebody in certain office, I can't have access to certain things, I can't even genuinely empower others. I want to move forward. What is your perspective in that regard?
Morality.
While you're holding to there, I want us to get back to that issue. What is the citizen's stand? I hope you're thinking on that. Yes, Mr. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's fine. So, you spoke on morality.
Mm-hmm.
You spoke on integrity.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the day, all of those things have, it's like a it's like a tripod.
Yeah.
Transparency is a must. You know, that sort of thing is very, very important. Now, what does this have to do with corruption?
Mm-hmm.
Everything. You cannot willingly, openly, blatantly be exploiting public funds or things that you have been entrusted with, be it whether you are a business owner who has employed people, be it, you know, a leader or even a person in the home, a leader of the home. If I go home and my children are saying, Dad, we're hungry, there hasn't been food in the fridge for 3 days, and I say, my children, please understand, I'm doing the best I can, and we'll resolve this issue as swiftly as possible. And I walk to my bedroom, put my bag down, open it up, and start eating a bucket of KFC while I'm watching television. This is an unfortunate depiction of what is quite possibly, or very honestly, happening in terms of corruption. The effects that it's going to have in terms of future generations and, you know, people being empowered and things like that. As a corrupt leader, I am not going to give opportunity to the people who have the skills to make certain things happen.
Yeah.
Things like nepotism, favoritism, and that tribalism, and all those things will come into play, and I end up sidelining people with the actual abilities to do things. Number one. Number two, if I want to hold on to power, I'm not going to say to you, let's say you're my junior and I'm in a position of power as either a politician, business person, or a person running a home, and I come to you, put my hand on your shoulder and say, I know you look up to me. I know you want me to take you under my wing and, you know, and maybe you work for me and that sort of thing, and you can, you know, you can benefit under my prosperity.
Yeah.
As opposed to saying, you have exactly what I have. All you need to do is just look at the bigger picture. Do you realize that with your skills, maybe you speak to so-and-so or not so-and-so, or even not just naming and pointing out to people, but to say, do you realize the value that you have as an individual? That value, because now I am, you know, letting you know, I'm awakening you to the possibilities or the abilities that you have. And to say, I came from where you came from, look at where I am, I'm here because of ABC, yes, I can mentor you and that sort of thing. But that's not what's happening. Even the people who are able to add value are being stifled. People who are unemployed. Okay, yeah, I'm sorry for doing the air quotes,
No,
but
it's okay.
but people who are unemployed,
Yes.
some of those people can actually be self-employed, but they're not given, or not even not given,
Resources,
just
opportunity.
just that the opportunity, number one, or even just the understanding that if you start here, if you start there, then you'll be able to elevate yourself.
Yeah.
Things like, I guess, one of the other things that corruption does is that it glorifies abundance,
Okay.
right? So if you are someone who, again, is not employed, and they say, well, here's the thing, maybe you can volunteer here and there, that sort of thing, but you think that is beneath you. I mean, years ago in Namibia, sorry, just to slightly deviate,
Yeah, that's okay.
there was nobody selling airtime on the streets. People were not selling airtime on the street, but there were people who were like, I need to make money somehow.
Yeah.
Until some other people from somewhere else came along and said, oh, okay, I will just buy airtime in bulk, it's cheaper here, and I'll stand at the street and sell it for the price that is on it, and I'm going to make a certain amount. If I do this over an amount of time,
Yes.
I'll make money. All of a sudden, when people see that, oh, I can do that too. Now we have people selling airtime everywhere. Someone decided I can take my braai stand, put it outside on a Friday afternoon, start braaiing meat, and people will stop their cars and buy a little fleece and bread. Now, other people are doing it. Now, now for leadership, people know what they had to do to get there. They have the ability to mentor. And the thing of corruption is it obviously has an element of greed. So in order to give people the information that would empower them, or even just turn your head in that direction, just to switch that perspective, just to give that paradigm shift, is not on their agenda.
Yeah.
And people will not understand the value that they have. But again, let's not put all the blame and burden on leadership. It also comes down to the individual. Because I'm looking at that minister or whoever driving around in all that luxury, and here I am lacking. Me thinking doing this, taking these small steps will never lead me to that. So even the skills that I have, the abilities I have, the value that I have to offer society does not come to fruition because I have undermined it. And I feel inadvertently that's how corruption also stifles progress.
Now, when we are moving to this session, we'll be dealing with us as individuals, our responsibility, our mindset, and our thinking. When we are moving to that session, I want to draw you back. I want you to do a research. If you're in any kind of leadership, go and look at the principles Julius Nyerere used in Tanzania. That was amazing. After independence, he decided, I'm going to develop farmers, I'm going to develop the grassroots. But I want you to go out, Google it, and look it for yourself. What are principles did Julius Nyerere as a leader used actually, without looking for sponsorship or getting money from IFM or World Bank? What principles did he use within his country, within his parameter and resources to develop his people? Now we'll be going on a break. After that, we'll be back to deal with us as individuals, our mindset and our perspective.